It gives me great pleasure to introduce to you Sito Negron, who is the El Paso expert on I-10 expansion. He has inspired me to write emails and to testify about this issue. It took me a couple of sessions and reading of his emails to the neighborhood association before I felt like I had a grip on all the complications. But he's here to help us with all that. As people know, Sito has worked for our former state senator, Jose Rodriguez. He is president of the Sunset Heights Neighborhood Association and sends really great emails. I don't live there, but I get those emails regularly. And he currently works for County Commissioner David Stout. This is a good time period to hear about I-10 expansion that, dare I say, the state oligarchs along with the local oligarchs are trying to impose upon us because the Biden administration is discussing infrastructure. And so there's a possibility that people in the community could get some way to influence and control or diminish the size of the project. So with that said, let me turn this over to Sito, who will present on freeways for the people. He will talk for 15 to 20 minutes. Then there will be question and answer, which you can put in the chat or raise your hand. Sito, the floor is yours. The Zoom is yours.
Let me just say that this is June 5th, 2021.
Thank you, Oscar.
All right, and it is 3:38 p.m. Thank you for a very generous introduction, Kathy. I'd make one clarification. I don't consider myself to be the expert, maybe the citizen expert, and that's part of the problem is that the experts, there's several of them in the community, but they mostly work for the institutions that are promoting these projects, either as professional staff or as consultants or as lobbyists. And so the deck is very much stacked against members of the public when it comes particularly to infrastructure projects like this, because the expertise is contained within the framework that promotes these projects. And so it's very difficult for citizens to understand it, to engage in it, and to make a difference. But it can and has been done, as Kathy said. And the most famous example currently is I-45 in Houston, which is one of at least 3 freeway projects that I'm aware of in urban cores in large cities in Texas. And apparently there's more. I just learned from looking at the abstract of the Texas Observer investigation that's going to be coming out later this summer that I'm very eager to see. So El Paso is in a context of statewide urban highway expansions that are being proposed. And I-45 in Houston is a big deal because the county filed a complaint with the Civil Rights Division of the FHWA. And so they FHWA, if I'm getting the terms right, and that's where the expertise question comes in. But at the federal level, the Highway Administration has put a pause on that project to review civil rights complaints. So that's a significant moment here. And the conversation, the national conversation from the New York Times. And I've been on mute this whole time. Nobody told me?
No, just right now.
Okay.
After New York Times.
All right. So you guys should be seeing my PowerPoint, and I will go to.
Okay, good.
I will go to the slideshow. And since I no longer see the screen, but I see a few of you, hopefully what you see is a quote here. Yes, you all see that? Great, we're ready to go. So thanks everybody for allowing me to present here. I know you all have heard me give this presentation or these, explain this stuff in bits and pieces. I want to thank Miguel Juarez and Debbie Nathan for the Freeways for the People idea. And there's a Facebook page, Freeways for the People. I urge you all to join it. Miguel and other people post really good articles on and commentary on highways and urban development that really inform this discussion that we're having. I also want to thank Vanessa Johnson, a writer and musician here. married to Rich, and who did an essay on Medium. And this is a piece of the essay that I'm going to start with here. And also the activists all over the community, members of this group, who really inform all of this work that we're sharing. So you can read this quote. I'm not going to read the whole quote here, but the bottom line is that this is what the valley used to be like, right? This is a natural area. We are the mountains and we are the river valley. There was still an Nesequa that ran by McGoffin in the late 19th century. We've transformed the city with tendrils of life into one with official channels only. Our imagination has totally failed us. We only know how to build gray things. And this concept, green and gray, it seems to have popped up independently amongst many different people. I think of it like that too. The highways are gray. We're surrounded by gray concrete infrastructure. It's heating up El Paso. We're one of the cities most hard hit by climate change. I was over at my uncle's house, and it was very hot outside. It was hot on his porch where there was concrete, but it was in the shade. It was a little bit less hot. And then as soon as I stepped off the porch onto the grass and under the shade of a tree, it was much, much cooler. This was the valley, even 100 years ago. So here's a picture that shows kind of the valley, 1853, right? The river valley, McGinty's Hill area here, where you might see my cursor on that. That's Sunset Heights. So El Paso has a European history that goes back 400 years, as much as anywhere on this continent. But it doesn't have an urban history that goes back that far the way, say, New York does. Our urban history is about 150 years old, and that gives us a little bit of an advantage, right? We have an urban core, but it also hasn't developed archaeological layers, and there's still hope. In Duranguito, the trees are still alive. Years after the city turned the water off, and the trees are still living. This is in the 1940s, right? It's a little bit idealized, but it still gives you a sense in the 1940s, just east of downtown, it was still the river valley. And that's what we got now. So that's the starting point. This project, Downtown 10, started as, quote, Reimagine I-10, which was what they call a corridor study. To some degree, it was a little disingenuous because we knew that really what they were going after was segment 2 here, the downtown portion. And they've been talking about that for years. In fact, the former district engineer, Bob Bielek, used to say that as soon as I-10 Connect, which we all know is the Lincoln Center project, as soon as that was done, they were going to start on Downtown 10. And that project needed to be done in order to divert traffic off the interstate once they started closing the freeway down downtown for this project. So this has been a long time in the works, but in terms of the public part of it, that only began in 2019 with the Reimagine I-10 study, corridor study. And then that corridor study resulted in Downtown 10, this almost 6-mile segment that goes through downtown from Copia to Executive Center. And that's where we're at now, is that they identified a project called Downtown 10, and they're in the process of identifying exactly what that project is going to look like. So the overview, the concept, is that the project would add lanes, which is capacity. It would add frontage roads. We don't currently have frontage roads downtown. So frontage roads are like what you see next to a mall, where the traffic is flowing very quickly and there's as few right turns as possible because it's basically a mini highway. New off and on ramps, so they would eliminate some of the currently existing ramps like Porfirio Diaz at Sunset Heights, for example, and reconfigure the on and off ramps. So that adds elevations on either side of downtown, and eliminate some of the north-south bridges that currently exist over what they call the trench. And the trench is that depressed portion of I-10 as you go directly through downtown. Ironically enough, that is as connected as it potentially could be because of the number of bridges, and every bridge has a sidewalk on it. So that provides very good connectivity, even though there isn't a neighborhood directly north of downtown, right? Sunset Heights is to the west of downtown, and the Houston Park neighborhood is to the east. The cost I've seen estimated anywhere from 700 million to 1.5 billion. The 700 million or 7 to 800 million is the most recent figure that I've seen on different schedules that they have on the project. Just for perspective, the abstract from the Texas Observer article, it mentions 5 Texas cities and 25 billion total in cost for the projects there, 25 billion in total for the cost, right? So as we go through this, I'll explain that one of the alternatives that TxDOT claims they evaluated was actually tunneling the entire thing from around, whether from Copia to Executive or whether from Cotton to Executive, essentially extending the trench from downtown so the highway would be depressed all the way through. And that was a $2 billion price tag. So basically they're saying El Paso isn't even worth 1/25th of what they're spending elsewhere. Similar projects in Houston and Austin were about $7 billion each. So not only are what they planning for El Paso bad, it's cheap. They don't think El Paso is worth it. And so that limits the outcomes that we can have. And the construction anywhere from 3 to 5 years. So the rationale, why do they want to do this? This is what they say. One is the pavement condition. So the pavement condition all over I-10 is bad in most stretches of I-10. In particular, in about the 6 to 8 block section that's called the trench, in that specific portion, they say that there's water infiltration and that's damaged the pavement. So that if we had, I think former engineer Bielik would say 5-6 hard freezes, that highway would fail. Because what happens is water gets between one layer and another layer. And if it freezes, it'll crack the top layer, making it not usable. So we have no reason to disbelieve that. So as far as we know, the only actual work that has to be done in this stretch of highway is that 6 to 8 blocks. Just make sure it doesn't fail. They also say that the bridge heights are no longer adequate for truck transportation because trucks ride a little bit higher now. I'm not sure why, whether the containers are taller. I think that's what it is. But so anyways, there's new bridge height recommendations. I don't believe that they're mandated. But I do think that when a roadway goes under reconstruction, they also then have to make those heights fit. But you could probably do that by lowering the roadbed a little bit through downtown. I don't think the bridges themselves are structurally deficient. I mean, an 18-wheeler ran into one of them famously and blew up. And thank God nobody was killed. But that didn't apparently weaken the bridge at all. So I think those bridges were overbuilt, which is probably a good thing. They also say future local traffic, and this is where we really get to the nut of it. The future local traffic that they project, in our opinion, is way overstated. I mean, that highway's been there for about 50 years in its current condition. And as anybody who drives through El Paso knows, there's no real choke point downtown. The choke point is at the Spaghetti Bowl and on the far east side and far west side, right? Starting around Sunland Park on the west side, starting around Yarborough on the east side. We believe what's really driving this is future trade-related traffic, and that really is likely to increase quite a bit. And so we think really this is being driven by trucking. And I think that's really what's driving this push to widen urban highways through the center of Texas cities, is to get trucks through there. And then incident management, they like frontage roads. TxDOT in particular likes to have frontage roads as a mini freeway. So if there's a crash on the highway, they can divert traffic onto the frontage roads and keep it flowing at a relatively high speed. The context, again, I said the mountain and the river defines this region, right? The river provides a pass, and the easiest pass, the one with the least grade, is the one that goes to the Box Canyon, the Asarco Box Canyon. But there's other passes. There's the Trans Mountain, which trucks don't like because of the grade. But there's also the Anthony Gap, and that one is fine for trucks. But there's no bypass yet that goes through the Anthony Gap. However, that's something I'll get to later. That is a project that's on the books. Other context is the heavy infrastructure in the heart of the city, especially south of the freeway, right? So I-10 really did a lot of damage. US 54 did a lot of damage. Took out parts of Austin Terrace, Government Hills, Lincoln Park. and took out parts of the San Francisco district and Sunset Heights. But south of us, around that same time period, was the Chamizal settlement, that put this heavy border crossing infrastructure, the part of the highway that joins to the Spaghetti Bowl itself, all of that is heavily concentrated south of the freeway, and the results of that continue today. And we've made terrible mistakes as recently as a few years ago, building the Border West Highway on top of Chihuahuita, and having this mini Spaghetti Bowl to the south and east of downtown, between Bowie High School and Segundo Barrio. So there's a lot of heavy infrastructure there. You can see that on this map. I mean, this map is dominated. The biggest things you see, it's not the Chamizal. You see the green of the Chamizal. You see a little bit of the green of the Chamizal on the US side. You start to see the mountain there, but really what dominates this view of the map is I-10 and the Spaghetti Bowl and this infrastructure that's concentrated around the Chamizal area, the Delta neighborhood, the Washington Park neighborhood. I didn't even realize that Delta Drive connects all the way through this mess, from downtown all the way into the neighborhoods around Escalante Park. I mean, Escalante Park is really almost, adjacent to downtown, but you'd never know it because it's just chopped up by this heavy infrastructure. So the impacts, it's going to take some property. They've dialed back from their original concept, which would take over 100 properties along Missouri Avenue east of downtown, but they're still taking properties. I think the number is anywhere from 7 to 35, if I have that right. So don't hold me to the exact numbers. It's a much smaller number, but there's still some impact on property takings. And those are shown on the maps for the three concepts or three variations that TxDOT wants to move forward with. It puts high-speed traffic closer to homes that adds pollution, noise, and vibrations to low-income and historic neighborhoods. That's as simply as I can put it. That's what it does. No matter what variation they're studying at this moment, that's what the project does. So they started with something that was really terrible, that took something that had a very huge negative impact on El Paso, proposed to make it a lot worse, and then started dialing back from that lot worse. So now it's less worse. But less worse than their original concept is not better. And that's what the community should be expecting, is better. It creates vast expanses of concrete on either side of downtown with more visible ramps, and it reduces north-south connectivity. Next slide. So you can see this is a conceptual map or drawing. It's not their final product. It doesn't include this deck park that I'll mention a little bit later. But what it does is you can see here that it eliminates some of the existing bridges here, some of the existing connections to downtown. Here and here, this is trolley only, this is trolley only. So it really has three. It eliminates the Prospect Street Bridge. People walk along this street here. They come up Kansas and then they cross here onto Missouri. This would be for cars only, so pedestrians would have to walk all the way to the other side of the highway and then double back in order to get into the neighborhood, where right now they have this direct line. So it really reduces connectivity. That's one of the great ironies of this, is because they talk about connectivity, but when TxDOT talks about it, they're talking about east-west traffic that's going long distances. They're not talking about neighborhood scale traffic or people scale traffic or anything that really benefits the communities here. This is another early conceptual drawing, and it shows property acquisition that they still contemplate on a couple of their variations that they're trying to move forward with. So this is all the property. Where's my cursor? This is the property on the north side of I-10 along Yandell that they propose to take. You also see here them closing down Prospect Street Bridge. Now, this is an older map, so it's not exactly what they're currently proposing, but conceptually, the big piece of it is that the idea of taking all of that is still pretty much alive, and getting rid of the Prospect Bridge is very much alive. So the alternative, basically right now, TxDOT is basically stopped studying any alternatives to widening the highway and adding frontage roads. They basically just have 3 variations of that. The alternative would be don't widen it, don't add frontage roads, tunnel the entire stretch as they claim to have studied, but haven't given us any information on. And as a region, make a real concerted effort to say if there's trucks that are coming through the region or even trucks that are being generated in the region, that those need to go around the city through the Northeast Borderland Expressway. And here you have this conceptual idea of it, right? So the Northeast Borderland Expressway would come off of Loop 375, past US 54 through Chaparral and over to the Anthony Gap. So that concept is very much alive. I think that behind the scenes, there's probably some jockeying for position as to whether that gets funded or the downtown piece gets funded. Maybe they both get funded. I think it makes the most sense to do the bypass first, see what the impact is on traffic and whether we really do need to do anything to downtown other than to make sure that the road surface is adequate. And ultimately actually even shut it down, frankly. We should have a long-term 30 to 50-year vision that includes getting rid of all of this heavy infrastructure to the degree possible. These are all different pieces of the process. I'm not going to go too much into that. I'm sure there's going to be some questions like what do we do next, et cetera. It's a very complicated process because look at all these acronyms on the screen here. And each one of these acronyms is something that's so involved that takes hundreds of hours of staff time, that involves votes in different entities, whether it's the MPO, whether it's the Texas Transportation Commission, whether it's the city council, county. So I'm not going to go through all of that. I'm not sure after a couple of years of this, I'm not sure I still even understand exactly what the process is, other than these are components of it that have to do with the funding and the approvals. This is another slide that shows the process. These are the stakeholders, right? This just shows you how fundamental a transportation project like this is. This is as big as it gets for our region and affects everything about our lives. And yet so few people, so few members of the public ever participate. In part, like I said, because all of the experts reside within the system. And so it's very difficult for members of the public to understand until they see a map and someone's going to take their house and then they're like, oh my gosh. And that's when they start to speak up. We're trying to be ahead of that, but even so, still feel like we're behind the process very often. I don't even know where they are in the NEPA process, for example. But you can see here, from what I've seen, the biggest drivers of this are TxDOT, Texas Transportation Commission, the El Paso MPO TPB, and the Greater Chamber and downtown developers, and to some degree, the Paso del Norte Health Foundation. So from what I've seen, I think those are the ones that have the most sway. And then you also have, various levels of elected officials, and to different degrees, neighborhood associations and civic associations and the Downtown Management District or the CRRNA, the city, the county. So there's a lot of different places. I didn't put on here, but realized recently the Texas Historical Commission is going to have to sign off on some of this. The TCEQ is going to have to sign off on some of this. The EPA is going to have to sign off on this. So there's as big as this list of stakeholders is, even as I go through it, I realize that I didn't include some. The deck park. You all have heard of the deck park. That's why I put the Paso del Norte Health Foundation as one of the stakeholders here. It's actually, I think, the Community Foundation. I'm not sure if it's the Paso del Norte Community Foundation or the Paso del Norte Health Foundation, but it's that organization, and they are the major proponent now of the deck park. It was first brought up by TxDOT, but now they've taken it over. That's a whole other discussion, the deck park. I'm happy to go into more detail. I realize my time is running a little bit low here, so I won't go into detail about that. Other than that, one of the things that's irritated me, frankly, I've said this publicly, is that the proponents of this call it equity, right? Because in some places, if you cover the freeway between neighborhoods, that can mitigate some of the noise and the pollution and provide a usable green space and help those neighborhoods reconnect. In this case, the deck would be between downtown commercial property and what the city calls uptown commercial property. And it would be more of an amenity or development tool. They keep talking about Clyde Warren Park. If you Google Clyde Warren Park, you're going to find a lot of articles about real estate development and land values. You're not going to find any articles about pollution mitigation or equity or restoring neighborhoods, because that's not what this project would do. So, it's fine if they want to promote an economic development project and try to convince the community that it's worth going for, but to use the language of justice and equity is not good. So the bigger picture, I already brought up this idea of the imposition, where the infrastructure is. So the deck park would be here, right? In my mind, if you really wanted to provide some equity and mitigate things, this is the Cotton Street rail yard, and it's not being used. And the Cotton Street rail yard touches Delta Street. And this is another reason why that bus hub at Bowie is such a monstrosity, an abomination, because now that bus hub is between this neighborhood and this neighborhood. And if we ever had a park or some public use in this Cotton Street rail yard, which is not being used, it would connect. You get rid of the Cotton Bridge. It would connect McGoffin and Segundo. It would connect McGoffin and Segundo and Chamisal and Bowie. And you follow Delta all the way through. And I don't have it here on the map, but you'd follow Delta all the way through here. Whoops, I'm sorry, this is Delta here. It touches Delta, so it would allow you to follow Delta all the way past Bowie, all the way past this mess here, down into the Washington Park Delta neighborhood, and all the way down further into Escarate. Now you're talking, we have these trail systems. That's great. We've been very successful in saving the mountain. That's great. We need now as a community to think about saving our valleys and restoring our valleys. And this line here is one of those ways to do it. You see the green piece is a little bit better here on this map, right? It's not a transportation map, but it's still dominated by this. But all of a sudden now you see Escarate, right? Here's Delta right there. And it follows this. It goes past the Chamisal, that little green space, that's Bowie there. There's the bus hub that interrupts all of this. And then there's the Cotton Street rail yard. So we really could have this beautiful thing in the place where it's needed. And there's another view of it. So the final thought is, again, I think this highway project is a chance for the community to really demand better, not less worse, right? Not a highway concept that makes an already terrible highway situation much worse. And then anything they do to mitigate it from there, we're supposed to be grateful for. And I don't think that's good enough. I think we need to demand better, not less worse. And with that, I'm done with the presentation. I will press escape, see if I can make this work. And there we go. And I will stop screen sharing as soon as I figure out how to open up. Oh, I see what it does. So it makes my Zoom tiny. So I'm going to expand my Zoom. Sorry for giving you guys a running commentary of what I'm doing as I'm doing it, but that's how it goes. And as soon as I get the little icons on the bottom of the screen, I'll stop. There we go. Stop share. Okay. So that's it. I'm done and happy to answer any questions. Thanks. I see the clap. So thank you all.
There are lots of points and questions made in the chat, but let me take a few minutes to read them. And if someone wants to ask a question or two now, please do it. Raise your hand.
So I'll ask a question if I may.
Yes.
So Sito, how can we support alternatives that are more community-based? And so how can we support the efforts that you've been working on?
Well, for one thing, get on the email list if you're not already. And then when I send out an alert for public comments, submit those public comments. So that's the most direct, immediate thing that's happening. Also, the more you learn about it, the more you internalize details about it and feel comfortable talking about it yourself, then bring it up in your own networks and your own circles. And if you have a neighborhood association or a political action group or an advocacy group, share it around. Go to Freeways Freeways for the People on Facebook and join that page or group. I'm sorry, that group, and interact with it when things get posted. So those are some simple ways. I think when I don't know where we are in the process, so it's hard for me to say, well, there's a meeting a month from now, so we all need to show up there. I do think that we need to do a better job in communicating with our legislators at the state level, as well as our city council and county commissioners court. So far, the county commissioners court is the only one that really pushed back a little bit. They asked TxDOT to continue studying the tunnel concept and the reconstruction without widening. And TxDOT basically said, no, we're going to move ahead with these three. They call them alternatives, but they're really variations of the same plan. That's what they've had in mind from the beginning. That's what they've been bent on doing. And so the county so far has stepped up a little bit. County Commissioner Ileana Holguin co-signed on a letter with Commissioner David Stout to TxDOT, asking a very detailed, long list of questions, two or three pages of questions. And it took 2 weeks for TxDOT to acknowledge receipt of that letter. And they still haven't responded. It's been, I think, more than 2 months since that letter was sent. So I think those trying to educate legislators, a lot of city council members and county commissioners and the state delegation know who I am. They've heard me say these things. So they don't really need to hear it from me. They need to hear it from other members of the community. And they need to hear it from groups of people. So those are some of the things, but thank you for asking that question.
There was another question about Loop 375, which runs parallel to I-10 all the way from the west side down to the lower valley. It was meant to be a toll road, but I don't think that they're collecting tolls. Why can't trucks use Loop 375 instead?
They do. Trucks do use that. I hate that thing exists, and I hate that. I don't want to be pushing more traffic to it because it goes directly over Chihuahuita. And frankly, I think the entire community was asleep. And I bear my share of the responsibility for that. I mean, I was aware of the project. I worked for Senator Rodriguez, and we knew the project was going there. But really, like, until those 100-foot towers started coming out of the ground, I didn't realize it was going to be an elevated highway like that. I think it's ridiculous. There's 2 highways there already. So what do they need another lane for? How is that really going to change things other than induce more traffic to go through it that could otherwise find other means? The tolling is I'm sure that there's constant behind the scenes work going on about that tolling. I think they're holding off on this is just conjecture. I think they're holding off on a decision until the political atmosphere at the top of the state changes. For several years now, the anti-toll people, who were conservative Republicans, were very active and very effective, and the governor adopted their rhetoric. And so no more toll roads. But North Texas in particular, but not only North Texas, other urban places in Texas want it. This kind of crossover. It's not a Republican Democrat thing. Lots of Democrats think toll roads make sense to pay for highway projects. So, over a year ago, I had heard that they weren't going to toll it, but they keep holding off on making the announcement. All the signs are still there, and I'm starting to think that all they're waiting for is for the political winds to change at the top of the state, and then start imposing those tolls. And then what's going to happen is that's going to become a sort of a private toll road for wealthier people from the Upper Valley Country Club area to get to their jobs downtown, because El Pasoans aren't going to want to pay tolls. Trucks aren't going to pay tolls. And then that's going to push all the truck traffic back onto I-10.
Okay, there are a couple of questions that name names from the chat. One person asked, would Joe Pickett help? Another person suggests pressure Congresswoman Escobar to influence the Federal Highway Administration. And another point says, contact the Transportation Secretary. Because of what Pete Buttigieg has talked about equity issues.
Right. Yeah. Thanks. Those are all great concepts. So Joe Pickett, I believe Joe Pickett is supportive of the Northeast Borderland Expressway, the Northeast Bypass. Joe Pickett doesn't have heartburn over highway expansion, I don't believe. I can't speak for him, but I've seen him work, and he's been the transportation he had been the transportation expert. After he was city council representative, and he served on the MPO, and he was very close to the original MPO director. And then he went to the legislature, and for 20 years in the legislature, he made transportation basically his only issue. So he is one of the statewide experts on transportation, and one of the most, at one time, one of the most powerful people in statewide transportation. And he never challenged the highway building paradigm. He just, I think there were just arguments over which highways got funded. That was basically it. And I'm sure that he's still angry over, former Senator Shapley and Texas Transportation Commission member Houghton taking the money that was supposed to go to the Northeast Bypass and putting it into the Border West, which is the extension of Loop 375 that you were talking about, because Commissioner Houghton wanted to complete the loop around the city. And so I'm sure that Joe Pickett is still upset about that. And I want to respond to Ray Rojas, who said that the neighborhood associations in Segundo and Chihuahuita were not asleep. I certainly didn't say them. When I said we, I meant I'm speaking for myself, and I'm speaking for other people in the community who might have been supportive of that or asked more questions had they really been able to understand what was going on. So that was my comment. The rest of his comment is their neighborhood associations are controlled by a few individuals, and they don't represent the whole community. Anyways, so
Another question is, are you finished with that?
yes.
Okay, another question was, has anyone heard any statement by the mayor or council members opposing this I-10 project?
Alex Anello, Representative Anello, District 2, because this project touches her. And by the way, it will continue, because after this is segment 3. I presented a lot of information, right? But this started with Reimagine I-10, and that was divided into segments. And so the segment after 2 is the one that I'm talking about now, that is now called Downtown 10. After that segment, the next one that's scheduled to be done is segment 3, and that's from Copia East all the way over to Reynolds, right? So just around the Bassett Center area. And that, I saw some drawings for that I'm sure TxDOT is trying to hide or disavow or hope that they never ever have to show to the public, that take a lot of property, residential property in the Lincoln neighborhood, the part of the Lincoln neighborhood that's north of the freeway, right? So if you notice, north of the freeway, the streets have names from the Korean War era, and those same names are present south of the freeway, right? That was one neighborhood that the freeway went through. That's why I mentioned Lincoln Park. So, anyways, this will continue unless we stop it at some point. This is going to continue, for the rest for generations, and so we need to push back and say that through the heart of the city is not the right place for this heavy infrastructure. It's incompatible with quality of life, and we need to make a decision to restore our valleys. So Representative Anello has voted against this project, and Commissioner Stout has voted against this project. So there has been support there, but the rest of the city council has not really engaged. The only one I've ever heard speak very favorably of this is District 8 Representative Lizarraga, and District 3 Representative Hernandez. And so those are the ones, but the rest of them haven't really weighed in one way or the other. Representative Schwarzbein has adopted some of the rhetoric of connectivity in neighborhoods, but that hasn't been reflected in his votes.
Mm-hmm. Oh, wow, that's depressing. Another question was raised about, since TxDOT is a state entity, why don't we go after state legislators?
Right, and so I've addressed that. They've heard me speak. I've talked to a couple of them. The person who really has been leading the charge on this is Representative Ortega, and she makes a fair share argument that El Paso deserves its fair share. I couldn't agree more. And so for that reason, I don't understand why she or other legislators wouldn't be pushing TxDOT to carry forward the $2 billion tunneling alternative, because El Paso deserves to see that option, which could mitigate a lot of the freeway. And who knows, if we could do that there and be successful there, why couldn't we look at a longer term plan in the future to tunnel all the traffic from the Bridge of the Americas and reduce the impact of that on the Chamisal and the Washington Park, Delta neighborhood, and Lincoln Park, and all of those neighborhoods, because we want to mitigate the damage now on what they're doing, but we want to plan for the future, for 30 to 50 year horizon, because that's how long transportation planning looks at. We want a vision for that future that restores the valley, restores those neighborhoods, restores the heart of the city, and either eliminates or gets rid of a lot of the damage of all of that infrastructure.
Mhm. Mark had a long point and question about why the exits on Loop 375 that don't really allow us to get off at downtown, you know, if downtown is so important. But he raises a variety of questions about Loop 75, which parallels the I-10 freeway. Any thoughts on that, or?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I understand the question.
Mark, do you want to say something? Are you still here?
Sure. You mentioned Sito that the only advantage for having 375 was to allow Upper Valley
Right.
people who work downtown to get downtown. That's not true, because I live in the west, and you cannot get downtown from the west. You have to go all the way to Paisano and backtrack to get to downtown.
But there's a Paisano exit, so you could get off the Paisano exit.
That's way beyond downtown.
No, you get off the exec at
I've been there. I know. I've ridden that route.
Right. So you get off
Not
375.
easy.
Right. So what happens is when you get to 375 goes past Schuster, right? So when you get to the Schuster, you get off the Schuster exit, you take a right turn and then a left turn, and you're on Paisano.
I know that.
There's a big
It's
interchange.
inconvenient for anyone coming from the west. If they're going to build a big bypass like that, for God's sakes, give people some exits off of it so that they can get where they need to go downtown. We're supposed to be developing downtown. That's not developing downtown. That's bypassing downtown.
Well, it does both, in my opinion. So we'll just have to disagree on that. But the other thing that it does is that coming from the east, to your point, it's even more egregious, because coming from the east, you can't turn right onto Kansas anymore. There's two streets, Kansas and
yeah, that's insane. Also,
they blocked off. Yeah, it doesn't make any sense. And the downtown merchants were very upset about that. So,
they should be.
Your point is partially taken, that there's no direct ramp that comes directly off of that portion of the loop into downtown. But it does, in my opinion, is very accessible and convenient.
The Paisano exit is way beyond downtown. It gets you close to City Hall. That's what it gets you close to.
Right. And so, like I said, we'll just have to agree to disagree on that. In my opinion, the Schuster exit is really that downtown exit. But also, though, building on that, part of what this Downtown 10 project would do is create new elevated ramps into downtown that take out the little park that San Francisco neighborhood currently has. It takes out a house in the San Francisco neighborhood. There's a young entrepreneur who's frequently promoted by the downtown developers, and he invested in building a new condo there, right on Stewart, and the highway is going to come much closer to him. There's going to be new elevations there, so it's going to be much more visible. So they do want to make I-10 more convenient to downtown from that respect. And frankly, I think that, the downtown development plan is not a community development plan. It's just a development plan. And so it's reliant on big boxes, right? So the proposed arena is an entertainment box. The convention center is an events box. The stadium is a sports box. The office towers are employment boxes. And so when you drive large numbers of people at peak periods, you overbuild, right? Because you're not building for a consistent flow of traffic. You're building for peak periods, the rush hour or the events. And the other thing you're doing is you're trying to fill up parking garages. So we don't talk about it a lot as a community, but a big part of the economic development strategy for the developers is to build parking garages, because they're very expensive up front, capital intensive, right? But if you have a parking garage that's attached to, say, a hotel, and your hotel's getting a 380 agreement, now you're getting tax rebates in part to build a parking garage, right? And then when you have events downtown, people have to park. So you're trying to build these funnels that get people to your parking garages that you then derive a lot of income from. You've made a big capital investment up front, but then the parking garage runs itself. You don't really need much personnel there.
Right.
And now you're just collecting the revenue. And if you have a tax rebate that partially covers that parking, if the parking is open to the public, right? So that's a nuance there. It may not be in many or even most cases, but it's something, those are the things that we should be looking at and figuring out, right? Do we really need downtown development that's based on parking, whether it gets an incentive or not? What does that have to do with community? What does that have to do with neighborhoods?
Right.
So all
If
of
it
it,
means,
yeah,
if it means taking out neighborhoods, I'm against that for sure. And even if it's an exit ramp. But I think we can agree that 375 is dysfunctional as it is in both directions.
Another question came up that Sito answered, but I think it's worth saying out loud. Can TxDOT make required repairs to the downtown segment of I-10 without this expansion effort? And Sito said in the chat, yes, they can. That's one of the alternatives they dismissed. So that is an alternative, and maybe something to push for. A number of chat comments have made suggestions about what CFC can do, taking a stand, writing a letter. One very ambitious comment is, can't community first develop a 50-year plan for transportation and other important issues facing our communities, incorporating equity? I don't know if we have the capacity.
Right. With all due respect, I want to say that was there. I addressed that in my opening comment, right? Which is, no, I don't think we can.
Mhm.
That's not our job anyways. That's TxDOT's job. That's the city's job. It's not our job. We need to force them to do their job and to develop those alternatives on behalf of the community. They're
Yeah,
the ones with the
that's a
money,
good point.
the engineers, the planners, the expertise. So, yeah.
Yeah. Another good question is, how could the Biden infrastructure plan benefit or not local efforts such as this?
Well, it's an interesting point. If the Biden infrastructure plan has billions of dollars for equity and deck parks are in vogue and they're being built all over the country, and we say, hey, El Paso's got an equity project and it's a deck park and there's funding for it, and that's the premise that we get the funding for, and the deck park is being used to divert attention from the negative effects of the highway, then it would not benefit us, right? It would be subverting the very intent of the Biden infrastructure plan. But on the other side, if the Biden infrastructure plan really does have funding for non-traditional ways of looking at highway infrastructure, and it comes with teeth, legal teeth, right? Like rules and regulations, like you can't make the highway, quote, less worse, you actually have to make it better, then it could benefit us. And the devil's in the details. And again, this is where we're at a disadvantage. The city has lobbyists at the federal level. The downtown developers have lobbyists at the federal level, or the ability to access those lobbyists. We don't. So, they're in there probably trying to figure out all of the criteria so that we could draw down funding as quickly as possible and get this project done. And so that infrastructure plan perversely then would not benefit us, because money starts flowing and they make the argument, we're ready to go. And if we don't do it now, we'll lose this once in a generation opportunity. Where have y'all heard that before, right? And who wants to say no to $1 billion flowing through the community, right? It could be a hole in the ground. It doesn't matter, right? It's a very difficult position to be in, to say no to that much money. And so it really remains to be seen, despite their enlightened rhetoric, how that will apply to us.
Mm-hmm. Okay, we're almost at the 4:30 point, and so if someone has one more pressing question, please ask it now. And if we don't have another question, maybe let's all say thank you and give a clap to Sito for a great presentation. Thank you,
all.
Sito.
Thank you all for having me. And
I like some of the new narrative you're developing, like the Save the Valley. We need some short phrases, I think, to capture what this is all about.
Well, my closing remark is going to be that I hate to put it into these terms, but it can't be it can't be overlooked. And there's people here who would put it in much stronger terms. But we were successful in Save the Mountain, right? And there's a lot more Anglo hikers, frankly, than there are Chicano Valley Savers. And they were very effective in preserving, and I love those efforts. I think we need to save all of that Casna Range, lost dog, like that's super important, right? We don't think about the valley in those terms as a natural environment that's worth saving, that enhances the quality of life for everyone in this community. But that's where the water is, that's where the trees are, that's where the life is. And we need to think of it in those terms as well. So thank you for noticing that.
Mhm.